Alaska is currently the 49th state of the USA, but just 2 centuries ago, Alaska was part of Russia, and surprisingly, Russia sold Alaska to USA for just $7.2 million, which was a bad deal at that time, because Alaska was, and is, a big hub of natural resources with current GDP of over $50 billion. That deal not only affected Russia economically, also Russia lost its complete hold in the northern Pacific coast. On the other side, this buying makes the US a great power in Asia-Pacific. Nowadays we daily see how hard Russia is trying to get the Ukrainian land. So why in the past Russia sold a massive, lucrative, powerful state like Alaska to USA? This is all started way back in the 16th century, when Russia is not as massive it looks today. During 16th century Russia started their eastern expansion plan. For achieving its goals, Russia fought hundreds of wars, and explored thousands of miles of land, and eventually reached Alaska, and then California. In 1581, Russia wins a Siberian territory named Khanate of Sibir. From there Russia's evolutionary journey toward achieving the Pacific started. During the 18th century, Peter the Great, the man who formed the first navy of Russia, was very curious about Asian territories, and he wants to know how vast is Asia, in the east. For accomplishing this desire, Peter started 2 and most influential explorations, known as the First Kamchatka Expedition and Great Northern Expedition, or the Second Kamchatka Expedition. The First Kamchatka Expedition started on the 14th of July 1728, from the mouth of the Kamchatka River, on the east coast of the peninsula, located in Siberian city Okhotsk. The crew sailed north and then northeast along the shore, exploring Karaginsky Gulf, Kresta Bay, Providence Bay, Gulf of Anada, Cape Chukotsky, and St. Lawrence Island. The exploration was led by Vitus Bering. He reached the Bering Strait that bears his name. From there he went through the Bering Strait to the Chukchi Sea, and returned believing that it had completed its tasks. While they had not reached the North American coast, but they had evidence that Asia and North America were not connected. Also they had lots of useful information for future expeditions. After the success of the first exploration, Peter decided to send Vitus Bering for another exploration known as Great Northern Expedition. In June 1741, Peter sends 2 ships for the expedition. The ships St. Peter and St. Paul set sail from Petropavlovsk. St. Paul was led by Alexei Chirikov, and St. Peter was led by Bering. 6 days later both ships lost sight of each other in a thick fog, but both vessels continued to sail east. On July 15, Chirikov sighted land, probably the west side of Prince of Wales Island in southeast Alaska. He sent a group of men ashore in a longboat, making them the first Europeans to land on the northwestern coast of North America. When the first group failed to return, he sent a second, which also vanished, so he weighed anchor and moved on. Chirikov and the St. Paul headed back to Russia in October with news of the land they had found. But Bering's ship was battered by storms, and in November his ship was wrecked on the westernmost shore of Aleutian Island, which is now known as Bering Island. Bering fell ill with scurvy and died on December 8, 1741. Soon the St. Peter was dashed to pieces by high winds. The stranded crew wintered on the island, and 28 crew members died. When weather improved, the 46 survivors built a boat from the wreckage, and set sail for Petropavlovsk in August 1742. Bering's crew reached the shore of Kamchatka in 1742. Carrying word of the expedition. This is a great achievement for crew members, because they bring hundreds of sea otters. The sea otter pelts they brought, soon judged to be the finest fur in the world, would spark Russian settlement in Alaska. At that time Alaska was very remote. Weather in Alaska is still harsh, but at that time weather is fatal, which makes colonizing the Alaska a big task for Russia. Also that time Russia's capital St. Petersburg was insanely far from the Alaska. Because of that Russia moved southwards, and reached California. In 1821, Russia formed a settlement in Fort Ross. Just after 3 decades of settlement, the entity which managing the exploration got failed, and remaining got sold. These all situations are affecting Russia harshly, but the nail in the coffin was the Crimean War. Actually, that time Russia tried to get control of the Balkan states of Bulgaria, Romania, and Moldova. These Balkan states was ruled and controlled by the Ottoman Empire, which was a Muslim empire. The main reason of Russia invading Balkan was, Russia wanted to protect Christians of the Ottoman Empire. In July 1853, Russia invaded the Balkan states, and Turkey officials the war. During the war, Britain and France was little tensed for if they don't stop Russia. Russia will eventually ended up getting control of Balkan, Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, so Britain, France, and Turkey formed an allied force against Russia, which impacted the Russia most in the war. For the next 2 years Russia fought the Battle of Balaclava, and multiple small-scale wars. Because of that Russia faced immense losses. Also Austria, which was neutral at that time, imposed lots of restrictions, which made Russia powerless. And finally on 1856, Russia signed the Treaty of Paris, and the war ended. This whole war scene affected Russian economy harshly, and economic conditions influenced Russia to sell Alaska. Russia has only 2 potential buyers for Alaska. One is Britain. Britain wants Alaska because they already colonized Canada. Buying Alaska would definitely give Britain hold on Asia Pacific. But Russia and Britain were enemies, that's why Russia was not interested in selling Alaska to Britain. The second potential buyer of Alaska was the USA. Also that time US and Russia were allies. Actually that time Britain have colonies in the USA. Because of this reason both US and Russia were against Britain. These circumstances makes USA a perfect customer for Russia. This video was complete summary of why Russia sold Alaska to USA on Globe. For more awesome 3D globe summaries please subscribe.